Everyone, big reunion. So there's some questions have come through, so I'll just open this up. And if any, we'll see, just jump in if you've got an answer, and if it's chaos, then I'll start chairing the meeting. But let's see. So we've got a question here from Gillian. She says, wouldn't it be amazing if we had a dedicated and protected space and time for teachers and support staff to collaborate? How might we lobby the policymakers in this time of change, in this time of change in the history of education?
I think, you know, stories are incredibly powerful. I think stories like Lisa's online collaborative network and the power and demand for things like that, the stories that those collaborations tell are incredibly powerful. And actually, I think the more as an education community we share the stories of those collaborations, then the more powerful they become and the more time we can demand to use it. You know, one of the things about traditional feelings around productivity is you have to be busy to be productive, apparently. And actually what we need is to help policymakers understand that that time to collaborate, to step outside the forum of constantly being in a classroom teaching is the most powerful form of professional development. And also a bit like the Barry Barish thing about rounded people. If we want our educators to be truly reflective of the challenges of the world our children are going to be moving into, we need to give our educators time out to spend time looking at that world, processing it and understanding it through the eyes of education.
Does anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry, I'd just like to come in there on the back of that. To be honest, much as lockdown was a horrendous time for everybody, it did hit the pause button, and I wouldn't have had time as a teacher in my normal everyday teaching to actually go away and learn what I've learned during lockdown. So I think it's really important that teachers are given the time to take control of their own continued professional development and share what they know with their colleagues. I think it's so valuable.
Yeah, I would concur. I guess that, you know, that for us, what we've been able to achieve has been around the stories, you know, being able to make a real difference with an individual or a team that we've been working with, and being able to share that good practice, and then from there be able to build capacity amongst the wider team and within the department to be able to create the changes that have happened. And that's really come through you know, being able to work alongside colleagues and for them being open and honest about where they're at and the help that they need. And that allows a more tailored approach, as you say, Lisa. There isn't a one size fits all. It's not like we can send everybody on a course and that'll solve the problem. There's no silver bullet, as Richard referred to earlier. We do need a more tailored approach to teacher professional development and what that looks like in this new space.
Gillian's just got back and said happy to support with the lobbying. So we've got one person in the army already. So we've got another question here from Katrina. She says, how do you encourage participation when learners don't have computer access? How do you manage with some who are much further on than others while still taking care of those that are left behind, even though it's not through their own fault? So it's kind of, I suppose it's managing the progression of different pupils from a distance almost. It's so difficult in that way.
I'm maybe coming on this one. I think it comes back to, like Lisa, you said about the pedagogy is at the heart of it. And when we have students in the classroom with us, we differentiate our teaching and learning for that. And we make sure that those students who maybe are at a different stage of their own journey have a place to go. They all have a place to go, and there's always a way for them to get there. And we try to scaffold that as much as possible. And I think shifting that just within the paradigm, so instead of being face-to-face people in the classroom, it's in a digital arena, but maintaining the same ethos of making sure that they've always got somewhere to go. Where can they go to get help? Where can they get support? And catering for those students in terms of differentiation, for us, is still at the heart of teaching and learning and the experience for every single student. So they're all getting their own experience. It is in a slightly different way, and it's on a bigger screen, and it's on a different screen, but it's there. And it's the same, as you said, Lisa, about taking the pedagogy and moving it into the digital arena. It's still human pedagogy at the heart of it.
And maybe that question's actually talking a little bit as well about the digital divide, you know, the fact that there is digital poverty. There are students who don't have access to hardware, software, or Wi-Fi access, and the challenges around that. I know that, you know, there's definitely, I think if you want to lobby, that's definitely something, you know, that we need to be aware of is, you know, for our students who are self-isolating for whatever reason, you know, how can they access their learning? For us as a college, we made that moral decision that those that were isolating needed access to a PC, laptop, or something that would allow them to engage more effectively with their learning. And so in the lockdown phase, we gave out 380 PCs to students for them to be able to access their learning. Now, obviously, you know, then coming into this phase, it's a sort of a mixture now between online and on campus. So I think for us, we try to use technologies that can be accessed through a mobile phone to try and utilize what devices that they have. We use Microsoft Teams and Moodle integrated through Microsoft Teams. And so that collaborative space with Class Notebook as their e-portfolio means that a lot of that can be accessed through their phone. So it's finding solutions that are accessible through what device they have available to try and utilize and maximize that potential. If someone
didn't have internet or connections, or the connection was bad or poor, do you have an approach there that you would take in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're not going to be able to give Wi-Fi access to students, but there are great Wi-Fi hubs. McDonald's, I remember talking to somebody who did a lot of their course operating near McDonald's because the Wi-Fi was fairly reliable, you know, so it's trying to find alternatives. That's why, you know, infrastructure like libraries and so on becomes so important for students that aren't maybe able to access outside of class time, you know, when they're doing homework or they're preparing an assignment, etc. So trying to find those digital environments where they can access some resources has been really important, but there isn't an answer. If somebody can't get even to that point, then their learning is going to suffer, and that's where the digital divide, I think, is a real challenge. And for us as a society, we have a moral obligation about how we support those learners, I think.
Yeah, I think this could be a renaissance for libraries, because there's so many people working from home needing a space it's close to them, that's not an office or learners, or, you know, it's a real opportunity to have community offices or something, or community classrooms or something. So it could be a renaissance for the libraries. I don't know.
If we're not allowed near each other in this
that's true. Once we can kind of take our masks off.
Sorry, I'll just come in. We have I work in a school with a relatively large free school meals cohort, and you know, there is some provision already in place. I think, yes, we have a way to go, but certainly in school we would have had a number of laptops that come in that are going out initially to year 12s and 14s, because they're seen as priority, and I know that any child in the free school meal categories can get access to BT internet as well. So I think provision is being made. It's just maybe not happening as quickly as we'd like it to.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to, because as a kind of a non-teacher, and we're working in the BBC, we rely on you for your expertise. What's changed in the substance of how you teach and connecting with pupils and the actual process of teaching? Because I know just from working, everyone's used to Zoom calls and it changes how meetings work. But so how does teaching change online?
It's the human interaction. I really am missing that, and you know, even just being down beside a child, particularly maybe a child with special educational need who needs that sort of teacher on their shoulder saying you can do this, do whatever. I find that difficult as a teacher, just having to stand back and, you know, wear a mask and wear a visor, and it just seems very impersonal. But actually the children are very accepting of it, and they're probably way more accepting of it than the teachers are.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. And I think it goes back to what Stefanie said earlier on as well. It's trying to create that environment that reflects the learning experience they might have had if they were on campus in an online context. You know, we were talking to a tutor this week, we were laughing, you know, because they had a 4.5 hour class in the evening. And they said, how am I going to teach for 4.5 hours? And I said, well, if you were in a face-to-face class, would you have taught face-to-face for 4.5 hours? And so, you know, we set them up with breakout rooms, with interactive polls and activities that they can do with the students, to divide them into little groups, to work on stuff independently, to come back together, to do feedback, and to try and, you know, replicate some of the learning experience that they would have had in a face-to-face environment in the online environment. So sometimes the challenge is thinking, you know, what is there out there that I can do to use to make this an engaging learning experience for these students.
And we had a question here. How do you approach? There's obviously students have very different home environments, and they have a very different learning environment in the house. Have you been able to adapt learning for different pupils, or is it too early at the minute to kind of know how that sits?
Yeah, I think that this is something that maybe is going to be the greatest challenge. Is, you know, some children have a lot of support at home. Some children have very little support at home. Some children have a great environment to work in at home, others not so much. And, you know, certainly during lockdown, we would have had children in school working in the assembly hall who just didn't have, you know, who needed that little bit of extra support. And I think if we are forced into another lockdown or into those situations, then those most vulnerable children need to be supported still in a school building, in my opinion.
Okay, so just, I think we're almost out of time, but I was just wondering, was there any last thoughts that you had or anything else that you wanted to share with everyone once we're all in the same room?
The one thing, I mean, from me, because first of all, can I just say, it's incredibly humbling as somebody that's not doing the job anymore, to listening to people who are doing the job, who are the real experts, and the level of innovation that's been going on. And that's really my final observation here, that I think for too long as a profession globally, we have been very worried about whether we have the capacity and ability to change and develop and take on new thinking and new practice. And what we've seen amplified, demonstrated here, but actually on a global sense within education, I think we need to take a step back as a profession and realize how remarkable an achievement educators have what they've achieved over the last few months is breathtaking. They've reinvented, they have reinvented an entire industry in weeks and months. They have absolutely transformed their service in a way that almost no other sector has been able to do. And so the only thing I'd urge the profession to reflect on, as and when the world returns hopefully to some semblance of normality, is just the capacity this profession has to actually change and adapt and innovate. And hopefully we can go into that next era with a greater sense of confidence. Because honestly, looking from the outside, my wife's school, the people here today, the other people I've met, I've been absolutely in awe of what teachers, schools and colleges have achieved. It's truly remarkable.
You're here, I think. Would anyone else like to add anything, or should we leave it at that beautiful inspirational end? Okay, well, I think that's probably all we have time for tonight. This will be available to watch back later in the week on the BBC Northern Ireland YouTube channel. But please do join us tomorrow night when the focus will be on blended learning. I'll also be presenting some of our new education resources that will come out, including a new programme for primary pupils focusing on the world around us and outdoor learning. So thank you so much to our panellists, Richard Gerver, Paula Philpott, Stefanie Campbell and Lisa Morrison. And thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again tomorrow at 7:30. Thanks very much and good night.
Bye.